Thank you very much, Raya and Mordechai, for broadcasting this class. Welcome, everybody, to our daily class in Chassidut. And now we're learning the Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers. Please open up your text, your Siddur, or your Mishna Avot to Perek Sheni, chapter 2. Today we're going to start with Mishna Yud Bet, Mishna 12. And we'll see how far we will get today, Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay. We are learning now the statements of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi was the third of the 5 students of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And this is what Rabbi Yossi says. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says, Yehi mamon chaverach, chaviv alecha keshalach. The money of your friend should be beloved on you as your own. Torah. Prepare yourself, set yourself up to learn Torah. For it's not an inheritance for you. Don't think that it's just like a given that you're able to learn Torah. You have to sweat. You have to put in an effort. And all of your deeds should be for the sake of Hashem, for the sake of heaven. Let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yossi says, Yehi mamon chaverach, chaviv alecha keshalach. The money of your friend should be beloved upon you as your own. So firstly, when you deal with monetary issues, whether you're in your own business and you want to do a deal, you have to be respectful of your friend and his money, and therefore you should be careful and not just treat it as if it's something which is a hefker free-for-all, but treat it with koved rosh, with seriousness. And it should be just like you love your own money. So too, you should also love someone else's money and try to keep as much of it in his own hands. Also, we learned a couple of days ago with a similar statement in Mishnah Yud, Mishnah 10, Yehi chavod chaverach, the honor of your friend should be beloved on you just as your own. So what we say is that just like you should love your fellow Jew as you love yourself, it's not only the person but also his belongings. That's the lifnim mishurat hadin, beyond the letter of the law. That is something which is in addition, sort of, or a deeper interpretation upon what it says, that you should love your fellow Jew as yourself. You should also love their belongings, in other words, everything about them. And when we say Yehi mamon chaverach, chaviv alecha keshalach, I want to mention something interesting, that there is a famous story, a very short story from the Rabbi, which I want to explain for a second. The story is an old woman that came to the Rebbe and wanted to receive $1. You can see this on the video. Where she comes, she had to wait online probably a couple of hours. And she said, Rebbe, how do you stand in line for several hours? I barely could stand here for 2 hours waiting for you to receive $1 from you, to receive a bracha. So how is it that you're able to stand for such a long time? And so the Rebbe answered her, when you count diamonds, you don't get tired. And I want to add upon this a very important addition, a deeper understanding into the story. That if you're holding diamonds, then you have to be able to appreciate that it's a diamond. So if you're holding a diamond, if you're a 2-year-old and you don't realize how the diamond is really precious, then really, then you're not going to treat it as being a diamond. Because in your little childish mind, it's just something which is, it's just something which is a regular, like a toy. It could be like a toy. So in other words, you have to appreciate that every single Jew is a diamond. when you look at every Jew as a diamond and you're able to see them and look into them deeply and to recognize how they are so precious, then it's not difficult to stand, so to speak. So it's another diamond, another diamond, another diamond. It's like counting a whole stock. It's like counting a whole stack of $1,100 bills. You don't get tired. Another crispy one, another crispy one, another one, because you appreciate how each one is really so precious. So perhaps we can add in this concept that when you look at your friend's money, you should look at it with other lenses. At everything, you can look with two different lenses. Even a diamond, you can be a mature adult, or you can be a child, and you look at the same precious stone with different with different lenses. So therefore, we have to be careful to look at our friend's money just like we look at our own. That's point number one. Point number two. Torah, prepare yourself, set yourself aside to learn Torah. For it's not inheritance. Like the Bartanura explains, that a person should not say, oh, my father is a Talmud Chacham, a Torah scholar. My grandfather was a Torah scholar. So for sure, I'll be able to work. It won't be such a great effort. I don't have to put myself into it. It's enough. It's enough that I grew up in an environment of Torah and in a home of Talmidei Chachamim, of Torah scholars. We should not say that. Hatken. That's like from the word tikkun olam. We have to make an effort in order that the world should be the way it's supposed to be. That's like the story of the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek. The Tzemach Tzedek's grandfather was the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya. And the Alter Rebbe once turned to his grandson and said, I would like to give you a bracha. I want to bless you in limud Torah, in learning Torah. In other words, to give you an extra special light, an extra special inspiration, an extra special bracha from above for learning Torah. So he did something which I don't know many people that would do. He said, thank you, but no thank you. I'd rather toil. I'd rather make an effort and learn Torah, really, really put myself into it, instead of just getting this bracha and it should come easy. Many years later, the Tzemach Tzedek said that he regretted that he did not accept the bracha from the Alter Rebbe. Why? Because if he would have accepted the bracha, let's say he was on this level, which was already a very high level, the Alter Rebbe would have lifted him up to a higher level, and there's always more room to grow. There are infinite levels into the depth and the breadth of knowledge and the kedusha, the holiness of the Torah. So he said, I should have, instead of growing from here to here, I would have grown from here to here, and that would have been a much, much higher level of learning Torah. But over here, the Rebbe asks a very interesting question. What does it mean, she'ena yerushalach? It's not an inheritance to you. What do you mean? There's a clear verse in the Torah, in Parashat V'zot HaBracha, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha kilat Yaakov. The Torah was commanded to us by you, Moshe. In other words, Moshe gave it from Hashem. Morasha, it's an inheritance, kilat Yaakov, for the community, the congregation of Yaakov, which is Am Yisroel. So how could we make the statement, she'ena yerushalach, for it's not an inheritance? You could say simply, don't take it for granted that which you have, a family or a lineage of learning Torah. You got to put yourself learning Torah, but how could you say the statement, she'ena yerushalach, for it's not an inheritance for you? And the answer can be as follows. In Torah, there are two levels. There is one level that Torah is called a Yerusha. Torah is an inheritance for every single person. What does that mean, a Yerusha? That means that just like a child which inherits the belongings of the parents, so too every single Jew, the moment that you're born, you inherit everything. If God forbid a baby is born and the parents pass away when they're 1 hour or as soon as they're born, they right away inherit everything. They're intrinsically connected to the Torah. Each and every one of us, beyond the knowledge of the Torah that we learn, that we have, that we accumulate, there is also the deep connection to the Torah, which is there, whether we know about it or not, whether we develop it or not, doesn't matter. We have it. So it's a Yerusha. That's why the Torah says, Morasha Kilat Yaakov. Then there's a second point in the Torah. That's called that it's a mecher. Hashem says to Am Yisroel, Macharti lachem Torati. I have, quote unquote, sold for you my Torah. What does that mean? That Hashem says that it's true that you have the Torah intrinsically, but there is something much, much deeper. There is something much deeper, far beyond the Yerusha, which means that Hashem gives us the opportunity to be able to acquire and toil in learning Torah. The Yerusha, the inheritance, is only makes us a connection to the Torah. Now that we have a connection, now we need to internalize it. Let's use, for an example, a store. You want to buy a chair. You want to buy a sefer, lahavdil. You want to buy a talis, tefillin. So if you don't walk into the store, you can't buy the store because you're not connected. But the moment that you walk into the store, you've already made some kind of relationship, some kind of connection with the owner of the store, or with a potential connection with the objects in the store. So the same thing over here. We are considered connected to the Torah intrinsically from the moment that we're born, or from the moment that we convert to Yiddishkeit. That the moment that we're Jewish, right away we have a connection to the Torah. But obviously that's not enough. We need to sit down and learn Torah, and every spare moment we need to utilize for the learning of the Torah and spreading the message, the inspiration of the Torah. So when the Mishna says She'eina Yerushalach, it doesn't mean literally that it's not a Yerusha. Obviously the Torah says, there's a clear pasuk, a clear verse in the Torah, Morasha Kihilat Yaakov. When the Torah says She'eina Yerushalach, it's coming as a continuation to the first part of the statement. V'hatken atzmach l'mod Torah. Set yourself aside, establish yourself in a sense of learning Torah. When you do that, and you realize that it's not only a Yerusha, it's not only an inheritance, but moreover, it's also it's a mitzvah to toil, to work hard, to make an effort to learn the Torah. Then we know that a person is going to do everything in their power to acquire the Torah. The acquiring, the mecher, the fact that the Torah is also something that we internalize, something that we learn. We work hard to learn the Torah, to understand every single word, to realize every letter, every iota of the Torah is exact, is divine. Then every spare moment we will learn Torah, and we will utilize learning Torah for really, that's the purpose of why we're here. And then, actually, before we go on to the last part, I just want to mention one more thing. It's an interesting word that the Mishna says, v'hatken atzmach. Establish yourself. Just say, make a strong effort into learning the Torah. It's almost as if you have to put yourself into this special chair or special scenario to learn Torah. V'hatken atzmach l'mod Torah. We have to set ourselves aside for learning of Torah. What does that mean? In addition to the actual opening the book and learning Torah, we have to dedicate our time, that time that we're learning Torah is exclusively reserved for that purpose. That's why we have it. And therefore, we should put away all distractions and set aside ourselves time no matter how long it is, whether it's a half hour or an hour or a whole day, or even 5 or 10 minutes, that time that we're learning should be exclusively dedicated to the learning. Period. End of conversation. And then finally, there's a beautiful statement, the last 5 words of the Mishnah. V'chol ma'asecha yiyu l'shem shamayim. And all of your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. Which means all of our deeds, even when a person does his regular, mundane, worldly matters, eating, drinking, and the way of the land, do not have in mind for your own personal pleasure. Rather, the person should become healthy and also to do the will of Hashem. It's amazing that in the Rambam that we're learning these days, in the first sefer, in the first book, because we just recently made the siyum last week, finishing off the Rambam. So right in the beginning of the Rambam, in the second set of halachot, it's called Hilchot Deot, the laws of opinions or knowledge. And the main focus, the main theme of learning the Hilchot Deot is the showing how it's possible, how it's important for a person to utilize their regular worldly, day-to-day matters for the service of Hashem. Whether it's eating and drinking, like he says, for example, about the Talmud Chacham, the Torah scholar, you can tell a Torah scholar by how they eat and drink. That the eating is not just eating because they love a nice tasty piece of steak, and they say a bracha, and they're just the juice, the fats is just dripping from all the sides of his mouth, and enjoying it and trying to keep the taste in his mouth for as long as possible. That's not what the Talmud Chacham is about. If it's not that he doesn't eat it, but he doesn't eat it for the enjoyment. Dafka in Chassidus says we're not supposed to negate the world. We're supposed to use the world for the service of Hashem. But on the other hand, we shouldn't get lost and caught up in the cravings and the ta'avot, the lusts of this world. Every single thing we should do, having in mind l'shem shamayim. So when we eat, we have in mind we should have the koach, we should have the energy to serve Hashem. When we sleep, before we go to sleep, we say the bracha hamapil, and we ask Hashem that He should give us back our neshama, all re-energized, to be able to daven properly, to be able to daven with a minyan, and to be able to learn Torah and do work honestly, and to be able to serve Hashem. And the Rambam even over there talks about also marital relationships. That even then a person should have in mind, for the sake of shlom bayit, peace in the home, for the sake of drawing down a holy neshama into this world. And even if one knows that there will not be a neshama, a baby born through that, nevertheless, there, according to the Kabbalah, there are neshamas which are drawn down from the higher realms, even if they don't come down into a body. But every time there is a union, a person should have in mind that they'll be more healthy, they'll be able to serve Hashem better, and they'll be able to use everything, even something which, according to the nations of the world and other religions, that may be considered something which is very mundane and very remote and removed from the service of Hashem. It's something which is very materialistic and coarse. It's not very unholy. According to Torah, it is not only holy, but it's the holiest scenario that can be. That is the marital relations, and so that's what the Rambam talks about. Different examples of ways that v'chol ma'asecha, all of your deeds, and he also quotes this verse, I believe. V'chol ma'asecha yiyu l'shem shamayim. It's very similar to another verse which says, v'chol d'rachecha da'ehu. In all of your ways, you should know Hashem. Whatever we do, we should know Hashem. But according to Chassidus, there is a small difference between these two verses. In all of your ways you should know him could mean also in if we talk only about the first verse, that in all of your ways you should know Hashem. So that doesn't have to be necessarily in your materialistic ways as well, in your business, in how you eat and you drink and sleep, and so on. In all of your ways can be learning. So if we only talk about in all of your ways, you should know him. It could be a spiritual ways. But over here, the Mishna we're learning v'chol ma'asecha yiyu l'shem shamayim, and Chassidus teaches us that v'chol ma'asecha in all of your deeds should be for the sake of Hashem. Ma'asecha, ma'asim, practical deeds, practical actions, not just a spiritual service of Hashem, but also in your day-to-day matters. You should also know Hashem. It should be for the sake of Hashem. You, l'shem shamayim, have in mind the entire time, as much as possible, that you're doing it for the service of Hashem. Then you know that your life is a spiritual life. Thank you so much for joining us. Bezrat Hashem, tomorrow morning at 9:30, we'll have Kabbalah Cafe. Looking forward to seeing each and every one of you here. And then, of course, Shabbat. We're looking forward to a special Shabbat. It's the Shabbat before the 3 weeks, before the morning, the 3 weeks of mourning. We're going to have a very special lecture coming up in a couple of weeks about the Beit HaMikdash from our dear friend Tzvi Herschel Moskov from Ramat Beit Shemesh Aleph, and a lot of great things coming up. So stay tuned to your emails and WhatsApps, and of course to our YouTube channel. All the best. Have a great day.